Let's crack open a 400-year-old playbook. I'm talking about a secret manual that didn't just teach artists how to paint, it literally gave them the blueprint for an entire artistic revolution. You know, when we think of the Dutch Golden Age, our minds jump to Rembrandt, Vermeer, this sudden, incredible explosion of artistic genius. But was it just genius? Or was there a strategy, a shared set of rules that launched Netherlandish art into the stratosphere? Well, the secret might just be right here, hiding inside a book from 1604 called the Schilderboek, which translates to the painter's book. And this thing was amazing. It was part biography, part poem, and most importantly, part instruction manual. And it was about to change everything. So, to really get this book, you have to understand the guy behind it, Karel van Mander. And he wasn't just some author, he was a man on a mission to completely change how society saw artists. See, at the time, Van Mander saw a real injustice. He wrote, pretty frustrated, that most people believed only generals and warriors deserved to be remembered for their great deeds. He was having none of it. He argued that the noble, artistic, world-embellishing spirits, the artists, were just as worthy of fame, if not more so. And this is what made his book completely different from his famous Italian predecessor, Giorgio Vasari. Vasari's work was all about the past, a history of who was great. Van Mander was creating a playbook for the future, a totally practical guide on how you could become a great artist yourself. Okay, so what was the first play in this book? Let me tell you, it wasn't some gentle suggestion, it was a mandatory and pretty dangerous assignment. Van Mander was crystal clear. If you wanted to be a master, you had to make the pilgrimage. You had to go to Italy, and specifically Rome, which he called the capital of pictorial schools, basically the world headquarters of painting. But here's the catch. Van Mander gives this stark warning that while Rome was the best place to learn, it was also the perfect place for spendthrifts and prodigal sons to completely ruin themselves. So this journey was the ultimate gamble. Super high risk, but also super high reward. So, what was the point of this whole risky trip? Van Mander lays it out like an artistic heist. The mission is incredibly precise. You go to Rome to master disegno, which is the art of drawing and design. Then you head to Venice to master color and how to actually apply the paint. The plan was to go in, grab the skills, and bring them all back home. And why did this matter so much? Oh, it was all about national pride. There was this fierce artistic rivalry with Italy. The Italians would kind of pat the Netherlandish artists on the head saying, "Oh, your landscapes are nice," but they'd dismiss their ability to paint the human form. Van Mander wanted to end that smack talk once and for all. This playbook was basically a weapon in a cultural war. All right, so let's say our artist has survived Italy and is back home, armed with all these new skills. Now it's time to execute. And this brings us right to the heart of the playbook, the core rules for composing a masterpiece. Van Mander breaks composition down so systematically. He outlines these 7 basic types of movement, or modus, for arranging your figures. It's almost like a grammar for building a scene. You've got your simple poses, like standing or bending, then you have directional moves, left or right, and then, the really cool part, creating depth by having figures move towards you or away from you. But above all those little rules, there was one principle that ruled them all. The single most important thing an artist could do to make their work amazing was to cram it full of variety. Variety in everything, movements, appearance, action, character, everything. And he got incredibly specific. He was basically telling artists, look, show people in every pose you can think of. Mix clothed figures with nude ones, and always give the viewer's eye a place to escape to in a distant landscape. And the don'ts were just as critical. Don't make the scene feel claustrophobic, and don't just randomly chop people off at the edge of the frame. Every single choice had to look intentional. So after you've mastered the fundamentals of composition, it's time for the advanced plays. Van Mander really pushed artists to go beyond just arranging figures. He challenged them to embed deep, hidden meanings and to tackle the most difficult visual effects imaginable. First, he introduces the concept of allegory. He calls these poetic devices that use signs and symbols to hint at a much deeper meaning. The idea was that a painting shouldn't just show you a scene. It should tell a richer, more complex story, but only to those who knew how to read the signs. And what was the ultimate test of a master? The true flex? It was the ability to paint what is hardest to capture. Van Mander believed that a painter's real skill was revealed only when they took on subjects like fire, candlelight, or even the horrors of hell itself. And listen to how he talks about painting fire. He's not just talking about colors, he's talking about pure emotion. The goal was to paint the terrible conflagration, a fire so powerful that it strikes fear in man's heart, with these wild flames throwing colorful reflections on everything nearby. And if you think that's intense, get a load of how he describes painting a vision of hell. He urges artists to make it look like the horrible vapors of the Styx, the river from the underworld. He's not asking for a literal painting here. He's demanding a poetic rendering, a scene that feels like it's been ripped straight out of mythology. So, what's the big takeaway here? What was the result of all this advice? Why did this one book from 1604 have such a massive and lasting impact on the entire history of art? Well, Van Mander's playbook was never, ever about just copying the Italians. It was about stealing their best ideas, that Roman drawing, that Venetian color, and fusing them with the rock-solid traditional techniques of the Netherlandish masters. He literally created a roadmap for a brand new, totally unique style of art. And in the end, his legacy is undeniable. As art historians have noted, the Schilder book did exactly what it set out to do. It prepared the ground, laying the entire foundation for that incredible explosion of creativity we now call the Dutch Golden Age. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? We all love this myth of the lone genius having a stroke of inspiration. But how much of the world's truly great art was only possible because someone, somewhere, first took the time to write down the rules of the game?